Hello, and welcome once again to another special interview with the Writers Republic series for the Guy Who Knows a Guy podcast. Today, we are interviewing Rob Rubinetti, and Rob is an author. He grew up in West Orange, New Jersey. He was very artistic, doing theater, miniature theater, playing music, but he had a great love of science and science fiction. My kind of guy. Likely why later he went on to obtain degrees in mechanical and nuclear propulsion engineering. Growing up in an unparalleled time of space exploration since he was a child only fueled his sense of wonder. Seeing the universe through the eyes of great people of the time like Carl Sagan and through platforms such as Voyager, Hubble, and the now James Webb Space Telescope, he could not help but be completely taken with the mysteries and awe of the universe. Throughout his life, he wrote stories which he kept until he reached a moment in life when he decided it was finally time to publish them, and Shadows of the Future is the first of that series, which we'll be learning about here today. So, Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate being here.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely excited to talk to you because I'm a bit of a geek myself, as you know from us talking before, and as the people listening probably know if they know me, and if they don't, well, I just told them I'm a bit of a geek. So Shadows of the Future, the first of a series, and as you may be aware, there's a few sci-fi books out there, a few 100,000. So how is your book different from all the other books in the market, such that someone should grab that one?
Well, that's a very good question. I wanted to try something that was a very different approach. A lot of the science fiction that we have out there are in worlds that have been established with all new propulsion systems and societies and things of that nature. My book specifically focuses on us where we are today, within the next 50 years, where we're going as a species. How do we get there? This first novel, Shadows of the Future, sets up our future in spaceflight technology. It is a first contact novel. It goes into how did we develop from a species that is essentially confined to our small sector of our star system to how do we expand beyond and where do we go? One of the issues that we face is how do we develop technology to get to these other star systems? However, I used the concepts that we have been finding new things just around us with all the new platforms, James Webb Space Telescope. Recently, we just found an entire galaxy sitting right on top of our own that's been hidden forever. So, the concept of this book, it introduces a new star system that we discover 1.8 light years away. But it also introduces the whole first contact between our species and another species, not directly, but a probe that we send out called Viewer that's beyond our heliosphere and is able to see this star system because it intercepts a communication from an alien probe. So it's actually a meeting between two probes in deep space. And that's how the entire book begins to formulate that we've discovered there's somebody else out there. There's somebody else exploring. We don't know the specifics. We don't know why they're out there. And we don't know what their intentions are. But in time, we get this communication, but we don't know what it is. And so the premise of this story is an old NASA scientist and his 17-year-old son. He was one of the builders of this probe that was shut down by NASA because of other projects that were being taken on. And he dedicated himself to reactivate this probe with his son. And when they did, they found this star system, and they also find this communication. The son, however, finds a little bit more out about his father and why he pursued this so much. And it had to do with the death of his mother. And so they worked on the project together, and the husband wanted to continue her work. And so the son takes a copy of the communication and dedicates his life to going ahead and decipher this. And he's about to go off to college, and he does. And while he's in college, that's where he meets a bunch of new individuals who influence his life and introduce him to new technology, actually technology for the hearing and visually impaired, which ultimately helps him develop a device under a professor at the university and his girlfriend eventually, who also happens to be deaf at the beginning of the book. and he develops a technology which eventually he's able to decipher the communications. And as the story goes on, he is put in charge of the project to eventually figure out how do we transmit to them, because later they find out that their calculations are incorrect. And this probe is not just sending signals to our probe, it's heading towards it. And after it heads towards it, it's going to head to us. And so we are on a deadline to figure out what are we going to do. Anyway, so this sets up the premise of the story, and naturally the military gets involved, governments get involved, and it's what do? We can't hide this anymore. There's a probe that's going to be coming into our orbit, and what do we do once it happens?
And so does this also get into like the sociological, like how does the public know? How does the public respond? How does the government respond? That sort of thing, beyond just the technology and the bleeps and the bloops and the bams and the zoops.
Well, the public is kept kind of out of this for a time being because of the way it's being managed, and naturally by the government. But what it sets up is, once the ability to decipher the transmission is determined, and once they determine that this probe is coming, they do form through the United Nations a committee to inform the world that this is happening. Because they're not going to be able to hide it from the world once this probe enters orbit. And they start deciding what are they going to communicate? What does it want? Why is it coming? And what they eventually find out is this probe is one of several that were sent out by this alien race called the Xenophron. They're from Gracchus, which is an actual star system 88 light years from us. It's the first red giant star that you'd find. And their planet is going to be consumed by their sun. And so they're looking for a new home. Earth is not their type of planet. So they're not interested in our planet. But eventually, what they do find is two planets in our star system that they are interested in. And they're interested in Neptune and Uranus, because this species lives for 10,000 years per generation. And at the end of each generation, they secrete a material in which then their consciousness goes into. So they have no consciousness really of, or concepts any longer of death, of, their lifespans are near infinite. So they don't reproduce. They pretty much stay at a constant in their society. And most importantly, they're not emotional. They're basically very logical, and they make decisions as a unit. So what they offer human beings, which is where the story gets interesting, is they offer a star system that was what our probe sees and where they were exploring, which has 3 Earth-like planets in it. And so they agree to help our civilization get there in exchange for Uranus and Neptune. And so this starts setting up, okay, we don't have the technology to get there. How do we do this? And so whole new technologies have to be developed. This becomes a main crux of the development of the dynamic fusion engine, which essentially is a particle accelerator that accelerates hydrogen to close to the speed of light, contains it in a magnetic bottle, fuses it, and allows fusion, essentially a dynamic fusion propulsion system, to develop, which allows us to ultimately reach about half the speed of light, minimizing time distortions, all the different Einstein relativity issues, and ultimately allows us to have a round trip to this star system in about 10 years. So 4 years there, including acceleration, deceleration, 4 years back, acceleration, deceleration, and 2 years to seed the various worlds out there. But there's some twists in that this race isn't interested in meeting a whole bunch of us because we're just too primitive for them. So they agree to do a meeting out there between their civilization and ours with one ambassador. So we have to send one person to this star system. That's going to be basically a 10-year, 4 years to get there, and then spend years with an alien to try to explore these worlds and provide all that information back to us.
Interesting. And one of the concepts I like there when I was asking about the economics and the society and whatnot is there's the idea of hard and soft sci-fi, but long ago I came up with the concept of viscous sci-fi because I was trying to think of a different axis, and that's more how it aligns with the soft sciences. So a lot of sci-fi, it's great with the physics and all that, but then it gets into economics and sociology, and it doesn't really touch it. Like just say in space and shoot your ray guns. But it sounds like yours really gets into a bit more of the human interaction and the politics and the military, and then when the public learns about it and all the dynamics, to get into some of that human stuff
Yes,
as well.
absolutely. Because one of the things that it does touch upon is our current state of the planet. The fact that our planet has gone through a tremendous amount of ecological issues, and so this provides, I'll call it the connectivity to bring many of the different nations together around the world to start talking and saying, okay, we can no longer act as individual nations. We have to act as a single entity. It's still very difficult for many of the entities to do, but it's the only way that we are able to pool our resources together in order to develop the technology and eventually travel and colonize these other worlds. And the first colonization happens at the very end of the book, and about 300 to 400 million people leave our Earth and go there. But in so going there is a mystery that has to be solved. The representative that we sent out on the very first ship, which was essentially I'll call it the scout ship, the Explorer, as they were exploring the last planet or coming to the last planet, both our ship and the alien ship and our representatives disappeared, not to be heard of. And so now we're thinking something nefarious may have happened. There's no communication from the alien species, and then suddenly the alien probe disappears from Earth and speeds away, and no one hears from it again. And so then we have to an agreement is made to send our colonization ship out to meet the fleet of alien ships that's heading towards us, but in that star system, to then find out what happened to our representatives.
And that sets you up for the second book in the series, I assume.
That sets up 3 threads, which definitely begin the next book, because there's a sequence at near the end of the book where representatives, the character, the main character of the book, Daniel, finally reaches this new star system, and he finally is going to meet a Xenophon, the representative, the alien representative. And this is very at the end of the book. So you're not meeting aliens throughout the whole book. It's not till the end where this meeting comes up. It's how do we get there? But when they get there, they find that on a moon of one of these worlds that they were going to explore, they find the crashed remnants of both ships. And when they get there, the moon is not habitable. But somehow there's a civilization there, just one little colony right near where these 2 ships are. And they get there, and as they get there, the alien probe and our probes are suddenly on obelisks directly in front of the city. And they go inside, and in the city, it's all made out of a unique material, but it's just because it's made out of material from the planet. But they get there, and they meet this other civilization that's a crossbreed between ours and theirs. Now, we can't interlink with the species, but what we did was the main representative that we sent out there was actually grown during the trip. He's a hybrid human, and that hybrid human is a hybrid of Daniel because he's the only one who can understand the alien language when this started. And so the representative, they took the cloning equipment out of his ship and created an entire species of clones to help them. But when the party finally gets to where these 2 individuals are, they're in a black onyx step pyramid. That's nothing like anything else on that planet or that particular moon. And they also notice that it has a lot of hieroglyphic marks on it that are nothing like their species or ours. When Daniel finally meets Christopher, his clone, and they finally have their discussions, and they tell them what happened, Daniel is given something that he's always wanted, which was something that was on the probe that his parents put on the probe, which was a recording. but he also is given something else. He's given an amulet. That amulet has the same markings as the step pyramid. And Christopher tells him to go live his life and enjoy his wife and his 11-year-old daughter, and enjoy them, because this amulet is for his daughter, and he would know when to give it to her. And he's been wanting to end this obsessive need to get out there from his father, himself, all the things that he had to do to get to this final meeting, and thinking, now I can at least have my family and be with my family. And now he's being told by his clone, in the future, your daughter is going to continue. And here's some alien technology that she's going to need. And for him to say that means that he knows something about the future that he does not, that Daniel doesn't. And so it sets up that there's something coming. And if you, at the end of my book, there's 2 pages epilogue, which talks about the rise and what happens with Amanda Stevenson, who is his daughter. And he tries very hard to prevent her from ever getting involved by turning her into the field of archaeology, keeping her grounded on Earth. Well, if he had thought about it, a step pyramid is not something that archaeologists are going to just ignore.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
and you mentioned the family dynamic. So through the series, you're following one family in multiple generations on through time.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct. When the story is done, it's going to cover about 100 years, starting in the very near future, where Daniel's father, Jon, and his mother, Marion, are working for NASA on the deep space probes, kind of like the one we're about to send out to Uranus. But anyway, they meet there, they marry while on the project, they get pregnant. And then shortly after the first probe is launched, the rest of the probes are discontinued for the moon base, the Mars missions, and all of this. And then the mother dies at childbirth. So the father becomes obsessed with continuing their work. The project eventually gets shut down after about 15 years. 2 years later, he has enough money scraped together to rent time to reactivate the probe. And his son is just before he goes to college. He takes him with him. And that's when they reactivate it and everything starts. So it's the father's, the father is actually very obsessed with doing this no matter what happens, even if he goes broke. But he wants to do this. The son finds this out by reading his journals and decides that he wants to pick up the mantle for his father. And that then brings us into Daniel's life of, it literally starts and ends at the same moment in time. And the entire book is told in flashback.
Okay. Interesting.
Because yeah, the opening, when the opening scene happens and the ending scene happens, it's literally within a very short time span of about 3 or 4 days, about 5 days, because he's with his father on the ship returning from the star system, and his father is passing away, and he wants to be with him, and his father wants him to tell the story. So he's there to tell the story. And a lot of people may have some questions about the first 6 or 7 chapters. I've been asked by several people who have read the book, Rob, the first few chapters seem a little disjointed. That's on purpose, because the first several chapters, the father is telling the story to Daniel, and he's shifting in and out of dementia, out of different time periods. And so he's remembering things that happened and then suddenly remembering another time. And these all are important because they all merge together. But it's important because then about chapter 7, the father gets into a coma, and then Daniel has to pick up the story. So it's told from his perspective.
Gotcha.
And so that's where everything comes together, because now he can bring the coherency to all of this, of the event that took place after that. So it's a pretty interesting thing. And there's part of the story that actually has to be told by Daniel's clone during the exploration and meeting the Xenophon ambassador, Venetia. And so there's a lot of dynamics that are occurring in this, but it was important to make it about one family, because that's the dynamic that keeps it together. That's the passion, that's the obsession, that's the drive. It's something that is within their makeup, their DNA, what they've seen in their parents, the environmental conditions, the things that their parents drove them to, that brought this out in them. Amanda winds up in the second book becoming a incredible archaeologist and meets a man that is much older than her and falls in love with her. And he is ultimately works with the military, who finds another step pyramid that's been destroyed on Mars. And so that's her, she gets sucked into it from that direction. And eventually she becomes the one person who is able to decipher the new alien language because of that alien tech that her father's clone gave her in the first book. So it starts setting up more and more and more threads. And then Amanda becomes a major character in the she's introduced as an 11-year-old at the end of the first book. She's the main character of the second book, big part of the third book, but her twin sons become the main thrust there.
And then the family dynamic is great because it allows you to use a long time span without losing the continuity. So the readers aren't like, all right, yeah, this is cool. 100 years later, different people. Because when you're trying to tell that long of a story, it's hard to keep the reader engaged. It's hard to engage with like a country 100 years later. It's not personal. Whereas a family, and this is their grandson, this is their great grandson, this is their great great grandson. It makes it very very personal. Speaking of personal, so you dedicated the book to a man named Ralph Kelly. So who was Ralph Kelly?
Oh gosh, Ralph was like a second father to me. Ralph was the art director, crafts director at the community center in West Orange, New Jersey. He taught my sisters, my brother, me. He had been a friend of the family for over 40 years. When I mentioned theater and miniature theater, I did it all under him. He taught me everything I knew about theater, about writing, about stories. I knew him. He knew me since I was born. My mom and dad were his best friends, but he really, when it came to that town, if you were in school, regardless of what school you were in, if you had gone to the community center, any art teacher, theater teacher, anybody in any school, they would know if you had worked with or had been instructed by Ralph, because he was just one of the most unique individuals out there, and he taught thousands of kids. And to this day, I get people calling me saying, hey, I saw that a guy called me from Atlanta. He goes, I saw your book and I saw your dedication. Thank you so much. Because he was taught by Ralph too. And he goes, you know what, he became a sci-fi person as well. He's done all kinds of neat stuff. And he's just like, Ralph just kicked that all in for me. And so he was a very special person, teacher to my family, and not just me, but literally to my entire family.
Well, that's fantastic. That's a great story within a story. So, and so this book, the first book is called The Shadows of the Future. Is there a name for the overarching series, or just the Shadows of the Future series?
Shadows of the Future is the overarching, kind of like Star Wars, I'd say, but Shadows of the Future will be overarching. Book 2 will be Shadows of the Future, Episode 2, Destiny's Child. That book, I just finished it. It's in final re-editing because I wanted to edit this one by another person as well. The third one, I'm in the process of writing now. It'll be Episode 3, it'll be called Dawn of the Changelings. And then the fourth and fifth ones I have not started yet, but I know what they're going to be. One is going to be called The Verge of Prophecy, which will be The Verge of Prophecy, The Warrior. And then the last one will be Prophecy Fulfilled, The King. And that's actually going to be the fourth generation of that family. And I could give a little spoiler if you want me to.
Well, don't spoil too much.
Okay, I won't do a too spoiler, but let's just say the final generation isn't quite human.
The Changeling title gave me this is the suspicion that might be part of it, but it sounds fascinating just from the titles with the directions that's going to go in terms of I imagine it has some very epic elements when we're talking about warriors, prophecies, and kings. Those don't tend to be small stories. So
and there's you're correct. There's a lot of that. There's like I said, the first book just builds where we're going.
Mhm.
And my favorite quote in the book comes from Christopher to Daniel, and he says, you know, when human beings eventually go and push further into the universe, there are things in the universe that are going to push back.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it's a very ominous warning. And what he's really warning them about is there's a species out there that is bent on the genocide of another race. And that other race is on an intersect course with the human race. And it's, if you read the epilogue of the first book,
Mhm.
that's where it's introduced.
Fascinating. Well, it definitely sounds. I'm going to get a copy of this myself because it sounds like a lot of fun and a great book. I'm glad I got a chance to learn your story and the story of your story and the story of the story behind the story and the stories. And anyway,
It's an infinite level of stories.
so many stories. So it's stories all the way down. So this has been fantastic. And of course, they can find the book on the Writers Republic site. So if they can just Google
And
Shadows of the Future.
Amazon.
Yep. Or
On
Amazon.
Amazon and Barnes and Nobles.
Okay. And depending on where they're watching or listening to this, if there's show notes, there's going to be a link. If there's no show notes, they can just search for Shadows of the Future by Robert Rubinetti and find it there. As I just tested that in Google, it works. You can find it. It's wherever fine books are sold. So thank you so much, Rob, for being on here. It's been great to hear the story, and it's always fun to find new sci-fi novels to read. And do you have any parting words you want to share with the listeners and viewers?
Well, to the listeners, viewers, first, I want to thank you for your time listening to the podcast. And really important is I hope you enjoy the story. If you pick up my book, Shadows of the Future, I promise it's a wonderful story. And the stories that are to come behind it are going to just continue to get better and better. It's just a really great story. And I'm hoping so far, I'm hoping that anyone who reads it is really going to enjoy it.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time being on the show.
Thank you, Michael. I greatly appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
You too.